I'm going to start off with asking Benson and Gayatri to start with opening comments on, particularly looking at this theme of changing planet as part of the climate Charche edition. And when you look at these two films, connecting them also to the Indian context. So I'm giving you a sort of larger canvas, and you can go in bits and parts if you like, but just also making those, how you what you were taking away from the films, obviously in the thematic, but then also making the Indian connection, because I think that's closer home, and obviously we want the younger generation and all of us to make those connections in our going forward processes. So whoever wants to go first.
I guess one way to just start that conversation is to really think about how we encounter this term changing planet. Right? We tend to think of it as something that is external, something that is not necessarily something that we are a part of. Or if we are part of it, it is involuntary, right? It's something that is happening to us. And I think with the films, both the films in very, very distinct kinds of ways, invite us to think about this bodily experience of change, right? Both as this idea of mental health that the first film kind of brings about. And I think it's the psychologist Albrecht who talks about this idea of solastalgia, right? How do we bodily experience this loss of a natural landscape? The second film, extraordinarily lyrical, that again invites us to think about how we think about these transformations, how we experience them. And in this particular film, in this particular context, we're talking about a context of the Nakba, which is invoked, right? We are talking about a context of water as an extraordinarily political context within which sovereignty is challenged, is claimed, is denied. We think of sovereignty as a term that is kind of a very esoteric, abstract political term, but sovereignty eventually is about life. And this film is fundamentally about life and the conditions of living and the ability to live. In that sense, this is a very kind of extreme exposition of something that I think all of us can find parallels to and connections to. And whether you look at it in terms of the politics around the Farakha barrage, or you look at it in terms of the contemporary kind of concerns around the damming of the Brahmaputra, or you look at it in terms of the ways in which the loss of the land that you belong to is experienced by farmers, by fisher folk, by young people in the Sundarbans in particular, is something that is coming to mind. These are all things that we're talking about, really a fundamental moment to think about the human condition. And we're looking at different kinds of displacement. There is, of course, the ex situ displacement that the Nakba invokes, of people being forcibly moved or who have had to leave because there's no water to continue with agriculture, for example. And there's also the whole sense of in situ displacement, right, where the land around you, the world around you is changing so fast that you don't feel like you belong, even though you're still standing exactly where you were standing decades ago. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now, but and have Benson chime in.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's possibly what we feel about Bangalore, right? I think today when I was coming here, it took me an hour to travel 4 kilometers, which used to take 10 minutes, not in distant past. And I think what both films do for me is that it's an acknowledgement of the hopelessness. That there's something going wrong, there's grief, there's a mourning, and there isn't this idea of denying it. There isn't an idea of it's not all doom and gloom. It talks about how intertwined it is with our lives. And I think the first film had this, which I think in some ways captures the entire it in fact counters the entire narrative about it's not that it's a civilization that's collapsing, it's not the world that's ending. So I think this whole narrative that's in media, that a popular narrative around the changing planet, around climate change, is often that everything's ending. So it's not about everything ending. It's in some ways, I think I've used this, I've quoted this in many places. An Adivasi woman that I met who said that climate change is possibly the earth taking care of itself, where it's getting rid of what is the problem. And in that, there is a lot of other things that are also disappearing. So it's not to be very glib and simplistic about it, but actually to acknowledge that what we're seeing is the fact that in these narratives, we also constantly talk of nature as the enemy. So there is this river that's gone crazy, the wildfires. We talk about the wildfires like we have nothing to do with these wildfires, what Gayatri referred to. And I think to recognize that we have to heal our relationship with nature. It's not about making nature the enemy in this conversation around climate change. That we have to acknowledge that it is in the healing of our relationship with nature that we can begin with anything in a real conversation around climate change. Because I think most of the conversations around climate change are about let's find those quick fix solutions, let's find something that we can sort out immediately. And the fact that this film talks about, both films I think, talk about the fact that it's social, it's political, it's psychological, it's not just an environmental problem. It's a civilizational collapse, it's a social collapse, it's a political collapse that is a part of it. And the fact that it's deeply embedded in a history and geography of a place. It's a part of what we've done, the kind of political boundaries we've drawn, the kind of conflict, the kind of conquest, the kind of occupation, and that's central to this question. So it's not about something that's happening to nature or nature doing to us. It's about what we are integrally part of and what we're doing to ourselves. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think both of you have really sort of, really weaved together how, these films speak to us as in themselves and to us in the city and domestically and internationally. So I have things to say on that, but I'm going to open it up a little bit to the audience and then come back. So anybody in the house who wants to share what your takeaways from this theme and these two films has been?
Actually, it's a question that I have. The fact that our surrounding environment has been changing has happened for a very long time. So, my question would be, how do we sort of get this concept that the actions that we do and the actions that humans do as a civilization on this earth is affecting us as well? How do we sort of get that into the collective imaginary, into the public imaginary? I think that should be the goal of getting the seriousness of the situation within the public sphere. I mean, that is what I wanted to say.
Okay, that's a very, very important Charche point, because I think really that's why we are all here. I mean, that's why we need to talk. We not just need to see, but we also need to see and talk about it. So I'm going to just get one or two more questions and then come back to you responding to that. Anybody else here?
So this is in regards to the first film of this set that we watched about the sort of anxiety that we go through on a daily basis. I mean, just before coming here, I was looking at the photos of the Los Angeles wildfire and some of the videos of what's happening in Gaza even right now. And then I just went about my day. Like I had to go to class, I was eating. And this is a dissonance that I think we face on a day-to-day basis, where even as you're scrolling through your social media feed, you see someone begging for help. And the next video is a concert or something. And we know these two aspects of life coexist. They're constantly coexisting. But the fact that we go about this dissonance on a day-to-day basis and we do nothing except just sit in our anxiety and doom scroll. I think I like that they ended on the note of taking action and allowing yourself to sit in those feelings as well. Do not try and run away and to say that, no, I don't want to see this anymore. I think, yeah, it's just more of a point that resonated with me than a question. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Benson, Gayatri, do you want to respond to that question and also what she's saying? Because there is a question embedded there as well.
So I think closer. Yeah. So I think one thing very clearly is that I don't know if we talk about it enough that this is just a 200-year-old way of living that we have, right? So if we're talking about industrial revolution and the post-industrial revolution, civilization that we've created, the kind of material culture that we've created for ourselves. So it's not this. And we talk about it like this. We can only live like this. We can only be this way. And again, there is this such a crazy notion that climate change will be solved through techno fixes. We'll find now AI is being talked about. So there are many places that I've gone to where people talk about AI and climate change. So again, we're talking about it from a certain technology, science lens. And the fact that we need to start going beyond this technology and science and to talk about it, not to say that there is no science to it. I think the science is very clear. The science is very obvious. We've denied it for a very long time. Now we've got also the term climate deniers, which we bandy about. But to recognize that, are we asking ourselves this really difficult question, but a very straightforward question about, is this the only way to live? When we talk about electricity, can we talk about a post-electricity world? And the fact that there are people who, even today, have very distinct memories of living very happy lives without electricity. So we've made certain things inevitable. We've assumed that this is the only way to live. And I think George Bush summed it up quite beautifully when America refused to sign the Kyoto Protocol, saying that the American way of life cannot be compromised. So it doesn't matter about climate change, doesn't matter about whatever it is, but this way of life cannot be compromised. And when we say American way of life, I think there are many of us in Bangalore who live possibly more than the American way of life, the kind of consumption, the kind of living, or the kind of idea or notions of what a good life is that we all have. So I think that's one part of it. The other bit about the dissonance, I think, I don't know how many of you actually experience climate grief. Do we talk about it as climate grief? Do we talk about it as climate anxiety? Or are we part of a large section of, a significant section of climate deniers, or believe that, okay, this is not going to happen, that means something's happening somewhere else? And I think that's my question back to you. Do we really frame it as climate grief? Do we really experience it? Do we talk about it in that sense? And therefore, acknowledging it and saying, okay, we need to do something about this. And I'm trying to link the two, that are we willing to rethink our aspirations? Are we willing to live differently? Are we willing to believe that maybe there's something, it's not about continuing to live the same way. And I think a lot of conversations about climate change is about how can we continue to live like this. And that's where I find false solutions and false hope when we talk about, oh, let's use renewable energy. I'm not saying renewable energy is bad. Let's use renewable energy, let's get electric vehicles, and that will solve the problem. Those are just band-aids on something that's like a much bigger problem, right? Even in the film, there is I thought that was like a very, very ironic moment in the second film, when he talks about the fact that where his village is used to be is where the solar park is, where the solar power plant is. And that's what we seem to be doing. We're constantly running after false solutions and refusing to acknowledge what the problem is. And that I think is also where the dissonance comes from, right? That I have to continue going back to my regular life. I will continue to live like this because there is no other option. And that's what everybody would like us to believe. That this is the only way we can live. Like, you can't live any other way, and if you want to live any other way, you're fully cracked. There's something wrong with you. You have no ambition, you have no, it's all wrong, and India is anyway shining brighter, so why would you not want to be part of that story? There must be something fundamentally wrong with you, so please fix yourself, is what you're told. So how do you actually start challenging that? And I think a lot of it is also in all of us. I mean, I struggle with it. So I know I might be sounding, I'm almost sounding preachy in the way of, oh, let's change the way we live. But I find it incredibly difficult to change the way I live.
Fancy, I was wondering if you also wanted to respond to that, because it's also an area where you are also trying to bring a certain narrative forward, and you're also dealing with, people are saying, okay, they're pushing this agenda, right? Well, what he's saying, there's this whole conversation. But what is it that you are trying to do differently? And where are the connections what are the connections that you are trying to make? And how do you see these films actually reflecting back to you in a way?
Okay, so one thing is, as Bengaluru Sustainability Forum, usually our scope is a little limited in what we do, but I think that there are connections and issues that are actually universal in that sense, and in fact that's a sense that I got through all the films in the morning and even now. Like, if you see the problems that the farmers are talking about, whether they're talking about in Palestine, whether they're talking about in India, in Maharashtra or Chhattisgarh, or so these seem to be universal problems and themes, right? And to go back to what you're saying, it's also about what is your outlook, what are the things that you are valuing, right? And especially, I also feel that to a certain extent, it's about the disconnect that we have in very urban-centric, ideas, modes of development and lives that we all are living in. And we tend to think of everything as resources to be extracted. And that also somewhere contributes to the whole framing of the question. Even when we talk about climate change, it is actually, the climate has been changing. What we always mean is what it means for us, for our lives, for the way we go about things. And that is what we are trying to think about. Yeah, like I mentioned in the morning also, it is about the interconnections between various aspects, because not everything is climate, but everything is impacted by and impacts climate. So I think for us, it is those conversations that become important, and especially in today's times when these are becoming like buzzwords. Everybody talks about climate, everybody talks about mitigation, but there is not enough attempt at understanding what it means, what are the differences, what are the similarities, and if one spends some time thinking about it and talking about it, I'm sure that we all realize that there are certain common threads, there are certain common perspectives. And somewhere I think all of us have a sense of where the solutions are. It's a very difficult path to tread, right? And you're happy in the spaces and the lives that you're having. So that, I think that's sort of where we are at. One other important question that I would like to add, actually, there is an important element of the issue of justice in all of these conversations, and that is also something that we want to include, in any chat or discussion about this issue. And I want everybody to just think about it from all these multiple perspectives, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, Gayatri.
I think I'm just going to pick up on what both Manasi and Benson are in a way saying, which is that thinking too is a political act, right? And before we rush to do something, we must allow ourselves the opportunity to actually reflect and think. And so I really like the kind of comment that you were making about how we get into these cycles of doom scrolling and then have to switch off and move elsewhere, and that's part of the story today, right? Which is that we have access to lots of information, and we actually don't know what to do with that information. We're terrified of having to actually think about that information. And so we really do need to think about and give ourselves the place and space to individually, collectively engage in these kinds of reflection, because that is the fundamental political kind of act that we need to kind of see more of. And this is not to say that we shouldn't be doing things too, right? I think that is important. But I think the crisis, the political crisis of today, is the inability to engage in deliberation, to engage in reflection, and that is what we're seeing in these films is the outcome of precisely that disappearing space. Because the last film, the second film, was fundamentally not about climate change, right? It was about the diversion of the River Jordan. It was about the settlements. It is about displacement. It is about violence that was perpetrated. It is about colonialism and ongoing colonial kind of practices. So if we have to think about climate change, we have to understand those relationships of coloniality that continue to exist today, and think very fundamentally about that power relationship and the ways in which we may or may not be implicated in it. And I think I'm just going to kind of stop with that, because I think that there's a lot that people are already doing and thinking about. But it is terrifying. It's terrifying to actually have to think about what all the information that we're able to gather, what is that demanding of youth?
I just wanted to come in here also just to share some thoughts that, I think when we look at the film like the Eulogy of the Dead Sea, there's a fundamental geopolitical contextualization that we're looking at, and we're looking at the ecosystem. We're looking at the planet. We're really looking at the planet as if, even cinematographically, it makes you kind of, look at that. And that, I think, of films like this, when then connected with the climate anxiety film, make, you don't, as a curator, for me, when somebody says, okay, curate something on climate change, there's nothing like that. There is no curation on climate change. It's this conversation that we have to, because everything is context. And today, when we see a film like this and we look back and say what is happening in India, rural and urban India, we have so much resonance of what these films are talking about, including what you said earlier in the morning. One of the young people talked about seeing the previous sort of films and thinking about what a child's perspective is. But in this whole adulting kind of mode, we are also losing it for ourselves, because we are adulting, but we're not even adulting enough, perhaps, in the really way, not in this millennial way of using that word, but really in terms of making ourselves conscious of the decisions and the choices that we are making. So I think films like this also sort of help us pause. I'm sure for a lot of you, and I can see that somewhere when we screen these films with young people, there's this kind of this anxiety to let's get out of this space. But these films are forcing us all to pause, to really pause and be there. Think about the next time when you go into the ocean, or you buy a Dead Sea mud bath, salt bath or whatever, which is coming from the Dead Sea. Think about whether we can actually, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not kind of saying some of those choices are absolutely wrong or whatever, but I think it's important to ask these questions, also make these connections, that we are part of the change, which here is negative change. Can we kind of flip it and be part of a change which is more positive and make those connections happen? And here I just also wanted to say one other thing about this access to resources and redistribution, because I think that is, again, I do want us to, put it into our context, because you all are fundamentally here right now, at least. And even when you go away, say, if not in this country or other parts of the country, the question of justice is very critical to any conversation on climate change or environmental impact or economic or globalization or all of that, because that is the baseline that we are moving from, Just wanted to kind of make those connections as well. I'm going to go back just for one question or to the audience, if there's anybody else here. Yeah, please, sir.
I was watching all the documentaries that were shown since morning with a lot of interest. What I feel is where to start, how to make a change. Like, if you take urban India, like Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, etc., how much of pollution these cities are producing when compared to a small village some 50 kilometers from Bangalore. The village life there, how distinct is it in polluting, in carbon footprint when compared to urban living? So where to start? See, today when I walk close to my house to get some vegetables or for shopping, many of us take our scooters, bikes and cars. This is where energy, we speak about climate change, we speak about consuming less of carbon emitting products. Similarly, when we order these days, I think the new stores are here, we see there is a box. Within the box, there is another box. Then there is an item that is available for our use. So there are so many things that we practice daily in our life without realizing how we are contributing to this big problem. Where to start? This is a big problem. This is a world problem. This is a local problem. Urban problem as well as rural problem or the village problem. So where to start, how to start, and what is the role of the experts as well as the role of education, role of media, kindly.
The idea that we should make small daily changes in our daily life is very, very important, right? And there are multiple things that we can do and that all of us know that we can do, right? From the kinds of ordering practices that you have to the kinds of different kinds of activities that you engage in order to get from one place to the other. But I think fundamentally you also have to, and this is a shout out to all the sociology students out there, right? You also have to fundamentally exercise your sociological imagination and understand why it is that you are confronting these kinds of ways in which your world is organized in this way, and demand more, right? Protest and struggle is a fundamental part of this story. Solidarity is a fundamental part of this story, right? The Amazon box that brings you your whatever, your book or your game or whatever it is that you've ordered, right, is an environmental problem, it is a labor problem, and it is fundamentally your problem, right? Until you experience it as something that you can no longer countenance, you are going to engage in small behavioral changes that make you feel good about yourself, but you're not necessarily addressing or willing to recognize the larger social structures that require change and that recognize that that change requires you to be involved in various kinds of struggles and acts of solidarity and compassion.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to also just bring it back to this question of justice that I think we use that word and in relation to what we're talking about. But if you just were to look at, say, the city of Bangalore and the traffic problem, what stops us from demanding free public transport for everyone and tax the cars? It's also our inability to occupy that space on that street and say, I want to walk, I want to cycle, I want to travel slow and comfortably. I don't want to be in that car. And whoever's in that car pays for it. And I think when we talk about protest or when we talk about solidarity, when we talk about asserting ourselves, and I'm bringing it back to that earlier point that I think everyone made about, it's a civilization problem. That we've assumed that the only way to travel in Bangalore is by car, by by private transport. That public transport is like a foolish thing to ask for. Is an absolutely stupid thing to ask for, is the assumption that we are all making. And we're constantly told that, right? And we don't want, so how is it that can a college reimagine? I remember I studied in St. Joseph's College, where there was one particular principal who insisted that all the people who came on cycles got to covered parking lots. And it was free. There used to be a fee. He cancelled the fee for cycle parking. He then went on to say that all the two-wheelers have to be parked out in the open. They cannot be parked under the covered in the covered parking lots. And you have to pay an annual fee. And if you came in a car, he would call the police. So you did not come to college driving. It was considered as unacceptable. So the cars were never allowed onto the campus. So I think it's also about how things have changed since then. That there are colleges that are building basement parking lots for student cars. And that's really, I think, so when we're talking about it, when I'm cycling, I'm not just, it cannot be seen as an individual act. It's not an individual choice. It's about, can the city support cyclists? And when I'm talking about cyclists, it's not about building cycling lanes and cutting off more trees and putting concrete on the side and building cycling lanes. It's, to me, cycling infrastructure in the city is trees. So I can cycle in a city that has so much sun, so many days of bright sunshine in the shade. I can cycle without the fear of being knocked down. I can take a bus from anywhere to anywhere. And these are, I think, ways that we need to start imagining this. Can we think about all the money that's being allocated for that tunnel from somewhere near Raj Bhavan to the Hebbal flyover? Use it for free public transport for everyone. I mean, we made a great step when we said free public transport, free buses for women, but for everybody. And I think that is a way of pushing those boundaries. And there are many examples. I think when I was watching this film, I was reminded of the anti-dam struggles in the Narmada Valley, and the fact that it was not between Israel and Palestine and Jordan and Syria that this conversation happened. It was happening between Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and they call the riparian states, which fought for share of the water. And the Adivasi communities whose homes were being submerged had no voice in this conversation, but they stood up and fought, even when they knew that at the level at which the dam had been built and the reservoir was going to be created, they would lose their homes. But they continued the fight, saying that the other 200 villages that are facing submergence should not be submerged. And they stood right through to the end, fighting with the people from the plains when the Adivasi communities lived in the hills and their homes went first. They still continued that fight. So when you talk about protest, when you talk about resistance, there are so many different ways I think you can start that conversation. And it is in your college, it is in your home, it is in the choices that you make. And those choices are not only individual choices to say, okay, I will cycle. It's about, can I build a community of cyclists? Can I build a community of people who, maybe you can grow food in your college, I don't know. Grow food on the streets of Bangalore. There are so many different ways of doing this and having fun while doing it. And I think that I forget this thing, but if there is no singing and dancing and fun in the revolution, it's not revolution. It's about having fun while doing it. It's not about bearing this great burden of saving the planet. It's about saying that I want to live well. I want to live happily. And to think about what that happiness and what that means. Is it about the next Louis Vuitton bag or whatever everyone aspires to? I think that's an old aspiration. Right? That's my generation. So, yeah.
So just a couple of interesting points actually, Benson, that you reminded me. Sorry. I was a part of the supporters of the Narmada Bachao Andolan, and actually, just to give that personal connect, that whole struggle is what made it clear to me that when I initially started, it felt like a human rights issue, but throughout my connection with them, I fundamentally realized that the problems of environment and the problems of people are not distinct. And it is a false dichotomy that we have to break down. Also, I feel more and more that climate change is a problem of imagination, and probably what all of us are talking about is reimagine what is the kind of life that we want to live, what is the kind of society we want to be a part of. And that is where the personal, what you can do at a personal level is to sort of imagine that society, imagine that life for yourself and commit to it. But also to understand that individual action has its place, but until we are all able to come together as a community and come together as a group which can sort of, amplify this problem and the solutions that we want to see, we are not going to move ahead. So that is what I would like to end on.
Well, there's this Palestinian author, Shahade, who writes this book called The Palestinian Walks, right? And it is his way of claiming his land is through walking. And I think one of the fundamental, people ask always, what is it that we need to do? And I would say, go take a walk, feel the soil beneath your feet, feel the water flow through your fingers, because we don't do that. And until you do that, this idea of you as part of this natural world doesn't get the same sense of confirmation. That is a fundamental part of also, as Benson said, finding the joy in an otherwise necrotic world, right, is to actually reacquaint yourself with the constituents of life.
Thank you. I mean, very well said. And I didn't imagine that this conversation is going to go with all of us saying and coming from, a certain perspective and context. We all didn't prepare this, by the way, huh? But I'm reminded of what I said many, many years ago when people would say, oh, climate change is this thing that might happen. And I remember then later another point when people, it was like 2030 and 2050, as if these declines are when this thing is ending or by then if you do it. And so I'm just reminded after this conversation, and that's the end for this slot, is that social change, not climate change. Let's talk about social change, not climate change. I mean, we need to talk about what is changing, yes, and that. But let's talk about social change, because fundamentally that's going to be where we are going to make those changes happen. And that will affect the planet in a way that we are part of that change. That is not a cliche, it's real. So I'm going to just say thank you to Benson and Gayatri, but thank you so much for this conversation. And really, let's talk about social change, let's talk about justice, and let's be part of that change that this planet needs.